when you consider the various signals that we are getting, both on the U.S. and the Iranian side, as they maybe are pursuing some kind of off-ramp here, do you buy it, or are you thinking there could be more escalation to come in the not-so-distant future?
Well, you actually really got to the heart of it. I still look at this as just a negotiating tactic on both sides. Both are playing it's negotiating gambits really on both sides here. And I don't entirely buy it. And the reason for that is that the two sides are so incredibly far apart. The U.S. has not budged from its 15-point plan. We don't know all the details of that 15-point plan, but we do know that it includes, it focuses on not just the nuclear enrichment and the nuclear material that's left in the country, but also its ballistic missiles, also its support for terrorist proxies. And then the 5-point plan is completely absurd and is a non-starter. And the Iranian regime has not budged on that. The regime, their only goal is to survive this war. And in their view, if they survive, they've won. And on the Trump side of things, yes, they want regime change, but Trump is not willing to put boots on the ground to affect that regime change. His view is, I am creating the scenario and the situation for the Iranian people to rise up, and it's up to them to do that. But at the same time, he has clear military objectives, and if he can't achieve them, then it's going to be a problem. I just view this, to be honest with you, as posturing, as a negotiating tactic. I expect escalation to continue, but I also don't expect this war to last for a very long time, given what the administration had promised from the beginning.
So, Hagar, it's great to have you back. What if the president actually made good on this report in the Journal? We packed up all of our toys and left now without reopening the strait. What would happen to the region?
Well, first, I would note, by the way, that is likely a position he's taking as a message to Europe, which is currently in a coma, and they're not interested or willing to get involved in this war, which I can appreciate. Except the way the White House views things is, well, we don't get our oil through the Strait of Hormuz. You do, Europe. And so why don't you help us? And that is likely a posturing position, a message that he's conveying to Europe to say, listen, you don't want to get involved? Fine. I might go ahead and close this war, end this war without the Strait of Hormuz being solved. But the fact is that affects, as we know, it affects it affects inflation, it affects our own oil prices. You guys covered, of course, the price of oil right now. I need to note this because I don't think it's covered well enough. And I know I'm speaking from a privileged perspective here, but when I worked in the Obama administration and at the White House, this was shortly after we imposed secondary sanctions on oil. The price per barrel was $123 a barrel, which with today's inflation would have been $175 a barrel. And so we've gone through phases like this, and Trump is aware of that. And so there are things he's willing to pain he's willing to take on for a short time period, at least, in order to try and achieve his objectives much further. But that's what this is about. Could he end this war with the strait closed? Sure, because he doesn't view it as a pain point for him so much. But he's really here trying to message to the Europeans.
Well, and I hear you on we've gone through phases like this before, but it begs the dangerous question of whether, Hagar, this time is actually different. If we leave Iran knowing that it can exercise authority over the Strait of Hormuz, it can control it, it potentially can charge fees in order to transit it, as we saw the parliament approve yesterday, of millions of dollars. Is that not going to fundamentally change the global energy market, which will have ramifications ultimately here at home?
Yes, well, yes, you're getting at the heart of this. There is, first of all, I don't see any scenario coming out of this where the Iranian regime gets any measure of control over the Strait of Hormuz. It never had it. It's certainly not going to get it now. Its own comparisons to Egypt managing the Suez Canal are absurd. That's a canal that needs management, that the Egyptians actually run and pay in order to control and manage and keep clear and so on. That has nothing to do with what the Iranian regime does regarding the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz. And so the Iranian view of this, the regime view of this, is literally a non-starter. But that said, all of it is a risk. The regime remaining at all is a risk, which is why the Gulf, Saudi Arabia, for example, wants the U.S. to continue this war. They don't want a Libya sitting next to them. It would affect their economies, it would affect their stability, and that's largely what they live off of. So that said, though, to get to your point, is that if you had this hypothetical scenario where the regime did control the strait somehow, and we somehow accepted.
But aren't they, Hagar, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but aren't they effectively controlling it now? If no vessel feels safe enough to transit it because of the threat of mines or other potential, or drones like we saw with the Kuwaiti oil tanker that was fully laden just in the last 24 hours, is that not effectively control?
They're certainly influencing the passage, freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, but there are also options the U.S. hasn't pursued yet. And so, for example, the U.S. could seize and invade and seize certain islands that are near the Strait of Hormuz, like Karg Island. You're hearing a lot of discourse about that. The U.S. could partner with Gulf nations. The UAE has already publicly called for a force that would include the UAE and others to ensure freedom of passage through the Strait of Hormuz. There are a number of military options we haven't pursued yet, and they all come with risk. I'm not trying to pretend that seizing islands is necessarily easy. There are two islands, for example, that are occupied by the Iranian regime that are actually Emirati, that the Emirates say is theirs. And so there's a lot here that could be pursued that we have not yet pursued yet if we decide we want to prioritize the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. So I wouldn't jump to saying that the regime controls it for sure. It's that we have not yet decided if we are willing to hand that control over to them. I don't think we are. I think that the administration is trying to posture here and see who's willing to join them in this effort. They are also, by sending so many Marines to the region, Marines, by the way, that have the capability to invade, they're also trying to say, listen, we've threatened you before with our military, and we've proven that we're willing to exercise it. So don't test us. And that's why I wouldn't, it's hard to say exactly what will come out of these talks. But I wouldn't say that we are definitely ending this war or that it's definitely extending. Trump is posturing here. He himself is trying to figure out how much control can he exercise over the regime.